last time we put Fjallraven's wonder material of vinyl on F to the test to see if it lives up to the hype and see if maybe that's why these backpacks are so expensive. And I was really impressed with this material. So if you haven't seen that, go check that one out. I'll put it in the description. But today we're doing what I originally had planned, and that's comparing the Knockoff Fancy Forest backpack to the real deal and see why this is $39 or $35 and this is $115, and maybe where the price difference come from. Maybe it's all hype, maybe it's all materials. So we'll kind of put that to the test and see why this one's so much more expensive. I really like doing these videos because there's people out there doing comparisons and breakdowns of products, but they don't really have the background I have, like being a professional leather worker. I've worked with tons of materials and I know a lot about how things are built. And so being able to break these down and show you what you're spending your money on and help you evaluate if you're buying a name brand just because of the hype or if you're actually buying a name brand that's high quality. It's super fun for me to learn and it's fun for me to share with you guys. So consider liking and subscribing. And now let's get to the actual breakdown. Right off the bat, you can just tell there's a huge difference. This is vinyl on and it's really like stiff material. It has a lot of structure to it. This is just really flimsy. I'm guessing it's a polyester and it just feels really cheap. It has that cheap Chinese feel to it. And speaking of Chinese, this was made in China and these are made in Vietnam. And then design-wise and aesthetic-wise, they're very similar backpacks. You know, if you're walking past them on the street, you never think it wasn't a Fjallraven. But there are some differences. Like the Fjallraven has a little pouch in the back for your laptop. The setup on the straps are a little different, as you can see. And then on the insides, Fancy Forest has a cheap liner in it. And it even has like a similar branding on the inside, but with one very distinct difference. The last line of the Fjallraven is, many of the early Kankens are still in use today. The Fancy Forest says, many of the early Kalidas are hot used today. I thought it was super funny. Next, let's talk about the hardware. So the hardware on the Fancy Forest, these snaps are a little bit cheaper snaps. You can tell by the way that they're structured. They don't have the same quality. They're more of an economy snap versus the Fjallravens. They are a higher quality snap with more material and they're gonna last a lot longer. They're just a different type of snap. These are just a better snap. And then to the zippers. So zippers are one of those things where it might not seem like it's a big deal, but if you've ever bought anything with a cheap zipper, it's always the first thing that fails. And the zipper on the Fancy Forest is very cheap. And when you zip it, you can kind of feel that little extra slop in there, which is a bad sign for zipper, versus the Fjallraven. This is a YKK zipper. And this zipper is just a lot tighter. It doesn't have as much slop and you can tell it's a higher quality zipper. Now to the actual plastic hardware on this. So plastic hardware or just hardware in general is another one of those things where you might not think it matters until you bought something cheap and one of these buckles breaks. So I don't know for sure if the Fancy Forest is a cheaper plastic. I'm willing to bet it is. And I'm guessing this is a higher quality plastic on the Fjallraven. So let's just try to break both of them and see how they break. Ooh. Well, that was very surprising. The Chinese Fancy Forest wouldn't break. It was a little bit more pliable. And then the Fjallraven broke so fast. I am really surprised that they put such a cheap buckle on such an expensive backpack. The difference between these two, this is a harder and more brittle plastic. This is a softer and more pliable plastic. And I couldn't get this one to break. Like even now, me bending on this, it's not breaking at all. So, oh, there it goes. So really interesting. I was expecting a better buckle material from the $115 backpack. Next is the strapping on these. So they both have a very similar strap. It's very similar texture. They're around the same thicknesses. I think they're both a polypropylene strap. So what we'll do to test that is I'll put a flame to these, and depending on how it burns and how it drips, it'll kind of give us some indicators of what type of material they're made out of. I'm pretty sure the Fjallraven is polypropylene because I read it on the internet, so it's probably true. So let's put the flame to these and see what they are. I ended up burning a lot more than I needed to just because it was so interesting burning this. So one of the telltale signs of polypropylene is that once it starts on fire, it'll start dripping, and then the drips will be kind of a clear, almost like waxy material. And both of them were very that way, waxy. It looks like you're like dripping candle wax, except for way more painful if you touch it like I did. So both of them, polypropylene straps. The Fjallraven is a little bit more, I'd say a little bit higher quality, but the difference is negligible. So that wraps up the preliminary testing, and now let's get to the actual testing of the materials and the fabrics. So I'm gonna cut some swatches off of both of these, both off the pockets, so that I don't ruin both of them. Let's cut some swatches off of it. Okay, we got our swatches made up. 2 for the abrasion test. We're doing a little bit thinner this time. We got our tear test. We got our burn test to kind of try to identify what this fabric is. And then our waterproof test. So let's start with the abrasion test first. Okay, results of the abrasion test. So the Fancy Forest. This lasted 12 seconds, and look how fibrous it is. So this is one thing that's annoying about a cheaper fabric, is once it starts to get some wear, it starts to fray like crazy and you get all these loose fibers and it looks terrible. Versus the Vinylon, this lasted 25 seconds. And as you can see, it stays pretty uniform even all the way till it breaks. So that's one huge perk of having a nicer material over a cheaper material, is it'll look better for longer and it'll last longer. So on to the burn test. Okay, really interesting stuff from the burn test. So I thought for sure this is gonna be a polyester, but I'm pretty sure it's a polypropylene type material or some sort of blend with a high polypropylene content, because when it dripped and burned, it dripped clear, which is a sign of a polypropylene. Kind of interesting. It's an okay fabric, it's pretty cheap. It's nowhere as nice as the Vinylon. I did the burn test on the Vinylon in the last video, so if you wanna see more about that, you can check that out. But let's get to the tear test. Another really interesting result. So I thought this was gonna tear super easy, but it actually, I can't get it to tear. This is some strong fabric. It's not as abrasion resistant, but this stuff is hard to tear. I have it down to like 1/4 of an inch and I still can't get it to tear. This stuff is crazy. That's why I love doing these videos. I would have gone in thinking that this was gonna be way worse than this one in every category, but this stuff is hard to tear. So interesting. And then the Vinylon, pretty hard to tear, but I still could get it to tear once I got it going. So now let's do the water resistance test. So the Fancy Forest, pretty waterproof. It took probably 20 minutes and then some rubbing to get some of the water to penetrate through it, but you know, not bad for a super cheap backpack. It's definitely not waterproof, it's water resistant. It beat it up, nice. And then to the Fjallraven, so the Vinylon, one of the attributes of it is that it swells like a natural fiber does when it gets wet. So it is more waterproof than some of the other synthetic materials, but it's not 100% waterproof. As you can see from this little swatch, some of the water got through, and that surprised me. I thought this would be more waterproof. You know, I think they're probably around the same amount of waterproofness. So overall, comparing the attributes of each, you know, the Fancy Forest, it's not gonna be as abrasion resistant and it's gonna snag more and it's not gonna age as nicely, but it is a lot more tear proof and it's just as waterproof. And then for the Fjallraven, So this is gonna age a lot better. It lasted longer on the sanding drum. It's not gonna snag, and it's just gonna age better. But it's not as waterproof, and it's 3 times the price. So overall, when it comes to the actual backpacks, is this worth 3 times as much as the Fancy Forest knockoff version? I don't know. I think it's kind of up to you guys. I think the real question to ask is, are you okay walking around with a knockoff brand that says Fancy Forest and with a leg in the air over the real deal? I think that's the real deciding factor for most people when it comes to quality. The Fjallraven is significantly better in a lot of ways, but 3 times better? I don't know. So yeah, kind of interesting stuff. Let me know what you guys think. Let's see what Toaster chooses. What's it gonna be? The verdict has been decided. It's Fjallraven. Toaster's chosen. So next, we've got the Converse coming. We're gonna tear these apart and see how they're structured and kind of give an analysis of these. So thank you so much for your support. Oh, deciding number 2. What's it gonna be? Fjallraven again. But see ya. Tell me you don't see the similarities between these two poses.